Alright guys, so in today's video, we're going to be learning the French defense, but we're going to be learning it in only 10 minutes. Alright? So what I'm going to be doing is going through the three main variations that you're most likely gonna face. And I'm going to try to do so in 10 minutes. I'm even going to have a timer here with me to make sure that I don't go over. The three lines I'm going to be going through today is the exchange, the advanced, and the lines with knight c3 and knight d2. Those three are the most likely ones you're going to face, especially online. So without ado, let's get into it. So let's start with the exchange variation. So e4, e6, d4, d5, e takes d5, e takes d5. Alright, knight f3. What I'm gonna recommend here is just bishop to g4, pinning the knight. What we want to aim for is just going for a setup with bishop e6, knight e7, knight c6. Alright, that's our setup. So bishop e2, start with bishop d6, preventing bishop f4, going for knight e7 and knight c6. Castle, knight e7, definitely going for that. Still going for a setup rook e1 and knight c6. And our idea is that we want to go for queen d7, queen side castle, and then attack on the king side with f6, g5, and h5. Alright, let's go to the next variation in the exchange. So e4, e6, takes, bishop d3. He wants, instead of playing knight f3, he wants to go knight e2, and similarly going for knight e3 or even bishop f4. So against this, I recommend just knight c6, tickle the d4 pawn a little bit. Pawn to c3, bishop to d6. We want to go knight e7, bishop f5. I want to continue with a similar setup as we had in the first line. So knight e2. Here, an important move that I want to introduce is because he wants to go knight e2, he wants to play moves like bishop f4. So we want to go queen f6 in this line before we go knight e7. One, it prevents bishop f4, and one supports bishop to f5 from us. After castles, we go bishop f5 and remain flexible in completing our development. Now, there's one more line in the exchange where he hits the center very quickly, and it's e4, e6, d4, d5, e takes d5, e takes d5. I know pawn to c4 hitting the center immediately. I recommend just knight f6, knight c3, just play bishop e7, knight f3, castle, bishop t2, and I want you to pay attention to this. If you had played bishop e2 or bishop d3, our next move would remain the same, which is d takes c4. Please know we waited until the bishop developed before we took on c4, so we could have gained an extra tempo. Alright? So after d takes c4, bishop c4, we've now created a weakness here on d4, because now there are no pawns that are able to support it from the sides, so it's a very big weakness for us to target. Knight bd7, castle, knight b6, back, c6, and we cover the d5 square, blockading in front of the pawn. h3, knight bd5, knight e5, bishop e6, develop our bishop, rook e1, rook e8, and now we have a solid position. We're gonna play moves like queen b6, rook d8, and put pressure on the d4 pawn. Alright, next line we're gonna move on to the advanced variation, where white takes maximum center of the pawn to e5. Here we just strike into the strike his center, trying to weaken his pawns with pawn to c5. Here, just a quick note: if he plays d takes c5, it's very bad for him, because bishop takes c5, his pawn on e5 is severely weakened. So as such, he maintains his pawn chain by playing pawn to c3. So if we take here, he just takes back. The line I'm going to recommend here is going to be knight to e7. with the idea that you want to place this knight on c6 while keeping the other knight on b8 to support our idea of playing pawn to b6 and bishop a6, trading the light square bishops. So knight f3, knight e c6, bishop d3, and we continue with the plan that I said before, b6, castle, bishop a6, and we know why we put the knights in this position now in order to trade off the position. Bishop takes a6, knight takes a6, queen a4, attacking both knights, but here we just go knight b8, protecting the knight, d takes, pawn takes, queen takes, and h5, and we eventually want to play moves like h4, creating more weakness on the king side, and then also putting a lot more pressure on the e5 pawn. All right, next variation is with the try for a b4 plan. So let's say e4, d4, d5, e5, c5, c3, knight e7, my recommendation, knight f3, knight ec6, pawn to a3. Clear idea is that he wants to go pawn to b4, so we play pawn to a5, which is a prophylactic move, stopping pawn to b4 from happening. Bishop to d3, pawn to b6. Our idea has not changed. To play bishop a6 and just trade the light square bishops, and we lift without our bad bishop. So castle, bishop a6, and we get to accomplish our goal of trading the light square bishops and continuing with our plans. Probably play bishop e7, castle, and create more pressure on the center with pawn to f6 at a good point. Alright, next variation is the variations with knight c3 and knight d2. Now here e6, d4, d5, knight c3 protecting the pawn. Here I'm going to keep it simple, just d takes e4. Now the same thing would happen if knight d2 was played instead, which is the Tarrasch variation. We do the exact same thing. We play d takes e4, knight takes, and we keep it very, very simple. Alright, so here knight takes e4, and here I recommend knight d7. The idea is that when I play knight f6, I want to recapture with the other knight. So knight f3, knight gf6, knight takes f6, knight takes f6, bishop d3, and pawn to c5, attacking the pawn into the center, typical for the French. Now we're looking at the line with castle. So we take on d4. White's idea is that he wants to delay taking on d4 for active development. So we don't waste time trying to defend the pawn. We just continue with our development. Bishop d6, bishop g5, bishop d7. Alright, developing our light square bishop. Knight takes d4, pawn to h6. Just trying to tickle the bishop a bit. Bishop h4. And now, surprise here, queen to c7. Going for attack on the h2 pawn. Pawn to h2, and now queen side castle. And we're going for a dynamic position where we can go for g5, g4, opening the G file and going for active attack. Alright, next line. So knight d7, knight f3, 6 takes, take, bishop d3, c5. And here white takes, d takes e5, bishop takes e5, castle, castle, bishop g5. And now we want to develop our light square bishop by going pawn to b6 and putting it on the long diagonal. Queen e2, bishop b7, rook d1, trying to get some discoveries along this line, and then queen c7. Please note we're not afraid of him doubling our pawns because of bishop takes f6, g takes f6, and now we'll have additional dynamic plans of playing moves like king h8, rook g8, and getting dynamic play on the king side. Bishop e4, rook a d8, bishop takes b7, queen takes b7, and of course we can continue to go with our plan king h8, rook g8, our piling pressure down on the king side. Now one more line I want to go through, which is here after knight takes d7, knight d7 is pawn to g3, trying to fianchetto the bishop. Now we want to make a counter to this idea, which is to play b6 and bishop b7. So bishop g2, rook b8, because we want to step out of the line of the diagonal. Bishop e2, knight bishop b7, castle, knight f6, knight c3, bishop e7, rook e1, castle, bishop f4. And now we want to play pawn to b5. The pawn on b5 is untouchable because of the discovery along the line of bishop takes b7. What we want to eventually do is we want to take on e4, want to push this pawn to b4, dislodge the knight from c3, protecting e4, trade everything on e4, and then eventually we want to get in pawn to c5 and liquidate the center. Alright, so that was my best attempt at giving you the French defense in 10 minutes. I went a little bit over, but if you guys like that video, please press like, or and in the comment section, please let me know which opening you'd like me to cover next in 10 minutes. Alright, until then, see you next time.